So we'll just, thank you, recording in progress. Good, well, wonderful. And thank you everybody for coming. And this is the second Zoom session that I've given around my new role, which is the lead Lib Dem voice on the Local Government Association, which covers all of the local councils in England and Wales. And that's on climate change, on housing, transport, economy, and the environment. So it's quite a wide brief. And as you'll see, all of those elements, do have implications for climate change. So it's all interrelated. And I'm part of the National Cross-Party Group on climate change. So very, very quickly, for those who don't know me, I arrived back in the UK, having left at the age of 24. And so it's about 30 years living and working, East Africa, South America, parts of Asia, and also in Europe, but a lot of it witnessing sort of testimony to climate change's impact on the most vulnerable, the ones who are already suffering climate impacts in these parts of the world. And then 2010 to 2016, there was a big DFID program, which was the Department for International Development of the UK, very, very important program, which was supporting developing countries in developing climate change policy and adapting to those terrible climate impacts. So I was working on that and commissioning to governments the support that was needed for that policy change. And then since 2017, back here in the UK, I've been working with the United Nations on policy dialogue, how you bring in issues around food security, nature, climate change into economic development decision-making. And then there's some politics. And, since 2018, I decided to stand locally. I was elected to the District Council, where I'm chair of two committees, the Climate and Environment Committee and the chair of the Planning Committee. And then just this year, I was elected to this national role, which is bringing me into contact with quite a few of the councils around the country, but also with ministers in government and in the House of Lords. And I'm going to talk today about, very briefly, as we all understand the urgency of action on climate change and some of the latest news, then the importance of COP26, the Global Climate Negotiations Summit, and also the work of this climate change task force and what we're asking ministers. And then feed back to you the more recent meetings that I've had, and one with the Minister of Transport, an upcoming one with the Cabinet, has a unit in the Cabinet on COP26 that I'll be meeting with. And then finally, the most important is about the climate powers for local councils, what this campaign is about and what you can do too to help. So yes, so the urgency of the response just got more urgent. We had the latest report from the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Climate Change. And it was kind of shocking because we knew the news that we had 12 years to transform society. And that was, a few years ago now, and the physical science basis for those projections is now the most wide-ranging, with the most up-to-date information possible. And what it's shown is actually, it's far more pressing that we didn't even have 12 years for that change. We need the change even more urgently. And the reasons why is they were saying that they'd identified a series of tipping points on the ice cap, tipping points in the permafrost, tipping points in the ocean, tipping points in the thermoregulatory systems. Those were sort of seen as separate linear developments that would soon reach a tipping point that would take us over the point where we could pull back. But what they've found now is, as the atmosphere warms up, these are now having an impact on each other. They are interlinked, and these interlinkages mean that there will be, the tipping points will happen much faster, and we will have a series of catastrophic, unstoppable, irreversible events. And some of those are that with the melting of the ice caps, it has exposed more of the permafrost. And in that permafrost, what's happening is as it's being exposed to the atmosphere, it's releasing the carbon that was stopped there, that was really, it was a sink, it was holding all of that carbon. That's now being released into the atmosphere as well. And what was happening is as the oceans are warming up and there is disturbance within the oceans also in the bottom of the oceans, in the floor of the oceans, in the seagrass, in the coral reefs, these were all ways that were holding and storing carbon. This is now being released. And so as each grade of temperature rises, each of these tipping points is affecting the other. And this is meaning that we've actually, this existential threat is now much closer than the scientists really ever thought. And we had a separate study here in the UK. And as I said, I'm used to working in countries, in developing countries, which have already for the past 10, 15 years been suffering the impacts of climate change. But here it seemed very distant. And now it's quite shocking to see that in the UK's independent climate risk assessment that was published just 2 months ago, the language that we've seen in other countries is now here in the UK. And basically the results say, because we've been so slow in taking the actions that we know we have to reduce carbon emissions, it's already hitting us. And what's already hitting us, we can't avoid. But we are woefully unprepared for the climate chaos to hit this country. This is what the independent UK climate risk assessment says. The last UK climate risk assessment was 5 years ago. And it says, we are even worse prepared today than 5 years ago as a country for these climate impacts, which are, more frequent and higher intensity of flooding. And here you have the charts in terms of the flooding as we go with greater warming, and greater increased intensity of heat waves. And looking at heat waves, the 2020 heat wave had a total cumulative excess mortality seen to be caused by the heat wave of 2,556 deaths in the UK, mainly observed in the 65 plus years group. Now, what they then look at is, why did that happen? Well, one, because of the heat wave, but why did people die? And what it found was that over 90% of NHS buildings and hospitals are at risk of overheating. Now, when I was working on the climate programme and we visited Delhi when they lost thousands in their heat wave, a study found that the people who were most impacted was those who are working outside, mainly traffic wardens and people working in the fields. They got severely overheated and had heat stroke. The ambulances couldn't get to them in time. But the point was, when they got to the hospital, that was the killer blow, because the hospitals were overheating and they died in hospital because of that added temperature in the hospital. Now in the UK, over 90% of hospital buildings are at risk of overheating. We're just not ready for this. In terms of flooding, mostly this will be local government. Local government were on the front line with the COVID pandemic, working with communities, working to get the food supplies out there, working to provide support to the communities and the grants. We will be on the front line again with flooding and with heat waves. But no council has an adaptation plan. So the urgency is there. We're already feeling the impacts in the UK. We're seeing how it's going to be impacting us locally. So what's the world doing about it? Well, this is where the importance of COP26 comes into being, which is the meeting that will be held in the first 2 weeks of November in Glasgow, hosted by the UK. And this is the most important of the COP meetings, which happen every year. And 26 means this is the 26th meeting of 196 governments as they meet to try and work out collectively how to deal with a global threat. And this is the most important meeting after the Paris Agreement, because the Paris Agreement finally got every country to agree that it would pledge to reduce carbon emissions, but that it wouldn't start putting those into place for 5 years, and that by the time it gets to the time to put them into place in 5 years, which was 2020, it would be ready then to up the ambition. Because very quickly after the Paris Agreement, when somebody added up what all of the national climate pledges total sum was, it's not enough to keep us from heating the atmosphere below 1.5 degrees. And that's the aim of the Paris Agreement, is to all work together to keep global warming below 1.5 degrees. What it looks like is this, is that we have a series of climate pledges from each country to reduce emissions. Most of them haven't been put into practice yet because they have this 5 years lead in time to get everything ready to put them into action, to have the laws and the policies and the incentives and disincentives. But if we look on the first grey column, that's the current annual emissions. That was in 2016. And where those annual emissions in 2016, where the emissions are headed if we continue with business as usual, with the new policies in place that were 2016. The emissions in 2030, consistent with a 1.5 degrees, is in blue, and net zero emissions consistent by 2050, which was our goal. There, you can see where we need to go from the red, which is where we are heading globally, and where we will be by 2030, but we need to be down where the blue is by 2030. We need to be down where the green is by 2050. And how do we do this? We do this by these national climate pledges, action plans, which turn into laws and policies and incentives in each country. But the ones that were submitted in Paris don't add up to enough. So in this COP, Conference of the Parties, conference of 196 governments, had pledged that in 2020, which was postponed to this year because of COVID, everybody would come back with pledges that would add up to something that would bring global warming down below 1.5 degrees. And so this COP26 in Glasgow, everything that has been happening has to make sure that each of the countries comes with increased ambitions and showing what they've already done and increased ambitions. And that clock that is there in Glasgow shows that of the 12 years that we had to transform society, there are 6 years left. But on the blue side is the hope side, and what it's doing, and you can look at this online and you can see as this is adding up, it's showing the lifeline, which is the amount of renewables that are being created around the world. So as the time goes down, how the amount of renewables is going up. So that's both the deadline and the lifeline, symbolizing this COP26 meeting. Now, the UK is more ambitious at the moment than most other countries. It is a leader in terms of what it says it's going to do. It did say that it was going to reach 80% of its emissions by 2050. It's now saying it will go net zero by 2050, and by 2030, 68% reduction of emissions. How? Because what we've got in place at the moment, the policies don't add up in terms of the UK. The standards, the policies, the incentives don't add up to reaching that. So what the government said is it's going to have a net zero strategy, and that net zero strategy will reveal all. It still hasn't published the net zero strategy, and we have 32 days to go. So we haven't had a sighting of our country's net zero strategy, let alone a consultation on that net zero strategy that will be presented to the world in COP26. But the headline is that we have the ambition. And the National Committee on Climate Change has come out for the first time, this was just last month, and having been very moderate, based on the evidence, advising the government, came out and said, we are not on track. We are not on track. And what we know of the net zero strategy, it is not yet on track. So it gave it lots of recommendations about what it should do. But the other piece of this is that's national government, but national government can't achieve this without local government and local action. And a study has showed that 25% of all the emissions in the UK happen locally and are impacted by policies and incentives locally, 25%. And so the Local Government Association has studied and put forward a local path to net zero and courted government to say, let's work together. But in July, a report that was commissioned by the National Audit's Office, which looked at local government and net zero, and it looked across the country, worked with government and with local government to say, what's the situation? And said, just as we've been saying, it's dysfunctional. It will not get us to the point where those 25% that happen locally, that contribute to our UK's targets, will happen. This is the National Audit's Office saying that there's a lack of clarity of the roles and responsibilities, there's piecemeal funding, and this hampers local authorities' abilities to plan effectively for the long term. And yes, it's been slowed by the COVID-19 pandemic, they accept that, but they say now there is great urgency to make progress. So at the Local Government Association, which I've joined as now elected as the Lib Dem voice on environment, housing and transport, I was then given the opportunity to represent all of the Lib Dems on this cross-party climate change task force, which are the chairs that have been elected by each of the parties. So I'm acting as the chair for the Lib Dems on that group. And what it's come together with the support of fantastic officers within the Local Government Association is to say, so what do we need to happen by COP26? What's our ask of government? And the first is, at this COP26, there was no day dedicated. So there is Agriculture Day, there's a Fisheries Day, there's a day about markets, there's a day about different habitats, there's a day about biodiversity and nature-based solutions. There wasn't a day dedicated to how we solve this issue around the relationship with local governments. So the first is to say, prioritize this, give it a space so that we can really showcase what can happen with local government. Now, this has happened since 3 years ago in the Peruvian COP in Lima, where I was, which helped to push ambition because it, for the first time, showcased local action, and it showcased business action, private sector action. And since then, that's been a part of COP26. And our COP26 didn't have a day like that. So this is the first to ask, to have that day. How can it be possible that we're going backwards? We're not even having that day. The second, there's been an international ask since 3 years ago. I've been working internationally with networks of local governments in each of the countries that have got the same ask to their governments. Let's understand that we need to work together at a multi-level action. And so in the global agreement, which was the Paris Agreement, it will now be the Glasgow Agreement, that in that Glasgow Agreement, we recognize the role of local authorities to work together with governments, because there's no time for not doing this now. And then finally, that in the NDC, which is everybody's National Climate Pledge and Action Plan, it's nationally determined contribution. So this is the bottom-up approach where each country decides itself. There's nothing imposed globally on each country. So then each of the countries NDCs, but in our UK one, at the moment, it doesn't mention local government. It needs to mention local government in that National Climate Action Plan and Pledge, and say how local government will contribute to that. So what have we been doing? Through that climate change task force, we've been meeting with a series of ministers who have been identified as the COP26 champions in government. So we met with Eddie Hughes, and this is what I talked to those who joined my first Zoom, which was Eddie Hughes, who is the COP26 champion for housing. And we talked about, obviously the role of local government in terms of housing. As I mentioned in that first Zoom meeting, Eddie Hughes was quite good around what's needed in terms of moving towards net zero and zero carbon housing and the role of local authorities in that. But when I said to him, Eddie, you're the champion, you're the Minister for Housing, Homelessness and Refugees. We will see more homelessness as a result of climate change with the floodings and the heat waves. And we saw it during COVID when there were people being evacuated to densely packed school halls when the flooding hit Shropshire and hundreds of people had to be taken out of their homes during COVID lockdown. And people who had COVID were being rescued by neighbours from their homes and being taken to those densely packed areas. We were woefully unprepared for a pandemic and a massive flood happening at the same time. How are we preparing in terms of adaptation plans at a local community level and local authority level for the homelessness which will happen as a result of these extreme weather conditions? And his answer was that he hadn't thought of that part. Actually, he'd been thinking about the greening of homes. And he hadn't really, yes, quite right, hadn't really considered the climate adaptation things. And he would go away and work with his group on that. So obviously we say, work with us as local authorities. We also met with Andrew Griffith, who was the champion for net zero business. And there were quite some interesting elements within that. And again, the big key issue here was about skills. So how we at local authority can understand, create the ecosystem of the new green jobs and help ensure that we've got the skills and apprenticeship and training programs for those who can move across and into these new green jobs. And then just on the 13th of September, we met with the Minister for Transport. And she presented to us, because it's just been published, the UK's decarbonisation of transport strategy. And what's interesting with that, the analysis of this is in July 2021. What we can see is a reduction because of COVID during 2020, a reduction in transport emissions, which we know are the source of the greatest emissions in our carbon footprint. So the bar that you can see in the year 2020 there is when there was the reduction of those emissions, mainly from cars. But then if you see the blue line going out towards 2050 is what is projected to happen with business as usual and with the few policies that are in place at the moment. And what this decarbonisation plan has to achieve is to follow the green line precipitously to get us down to 2050. And they showed us that we've had a 4% reduction over the last 9 years in transport emissions. And what we need from now until 2030 is 4% a year. What was very interesting for a government that talks about us being a car-owning economy in the last spending review, in the last budget, where we got masses more for highways than we did for buses, is that it says we want to reduce urban road traffic overall. That's a first. That's massive. But they also recognise that leadership in climate actions at local level is crucial because the vast majority of all transport journeys are local. Just quickly describing what you can see there on that chart. Below the red line, below that red line on the chart there, in blue, those are trips, the number of trips, and it goes outwards to about 75% of trips. To the right-hand side, in orange, that's the amount of miles. So what we can see there is over 90% of trips are local. Over 90% of trips are local. And they also have a large amount of the mileage, but the mileage there is around, around sort of 60%. What's interesting, so we do need to deal with it locally. What's also interesting is we can't only deal with it locally, and we have to work with central government, because then we've got 35% of the mileage that causes the carbon emissions are from single trips, because these are long distance. These are long distance journeys, mainly by our HGVs. So this is where we need to work together with government between addressing both the local and then the national and regional. And we also had a presentation from a representative from the motor industry, looking at, well, if part of the answer to this from the local side is electric vehicles, and we need to have reached a critical mass of electric vehicle replacement in the country, what are the barriers to mass market uptake? And they still are, at the moment, the pricing. This is due to a survey that was done. People are still put off by price or perception of price. But very close under that is the whole system of charge points, the lack of local charge points and the lack of available and working charge points for longer journeys. So again, that's a local responsibility in terms of working out those charge points. And yet local authorities have no mandate for doing that. So some councils are trying, and many of them being pressured to do this, but actually there is no mandate. So charge points are being put in mainly by the private sector, and some through government investment, but that local piece of making this all work is not yet there. And what the Motorist Society said, this is massive. This will be the biggest barrier to that. So I'm very happy to take questions from you about that meeting with those. We talked about lots of things in that meeting with the Minister of Transport and the things we said. So I'm very, very happy to take questions from you on that. But I also want to have from you, when we get to the part where we'll more of a discussion, is my upcoming meetings are with the Minister for Environment and also with a member of the Cabinet's COP26 unit. So they have established within the Cabinet a COP26 unit that's working towards the Glasgow COP26. And this is where we're hoping again to have the lever to be able to get this message across. But based on those meetings that I've had with the ministers so far, they are not listening. They are giving us the space, they're giving us the opportunity to talk, but we are not reaching any agreements in those meetings, binding agreements, nor are we hearing the right words back, that it's in the net zero strategy. Don't worry, it's in the net zero strategy. We're not hearing this. And we've only got 32 days to go. So within the Lib Dems at the Local Government Association, I challenged the whole of the LGA during our meeting in London 2 weeks ago, when everybody came together for the first time with all the newly elected members and re-elected members. And we had all of the officers there too. And I said to everybody, have you ever managed together cross-party to influence a government policy, make a real change? And they said, in fact, they said the CEO will answer to this. So he came up and answered my question, which was, yes, when there was the threat to remove Public Health England from local authority and put it into NHS. And he said the way then that this happened was when everybody across all the local councils in the LGA cross-party agreed one or two things only to go for. And he said, and the other thing, so that all the lobbying goes in that way, which is what is happening in some ways at the moment. But the other way was that every council has huge influence locally and is on their MPs. And that what they did was this mass campaign of every council getting everybody to lobby their MPs, telling them who to talk to deal with this. And I asked, is that happening at the moment about the climate change thing? No, because it hadn't been prioritized yet. So what we are doing as the Lib Dems within the LGA is saying, this is the issue because it's time bound, it's limited. I absolutely believe that there's a huge opportunity within COP26 when we are globally the climate leader and president of this summit, that this is our opportunity for this big announcement to be made that the government will devolve these powers. But it's also our last chance because they will be putting in huge budget commitments to show how we are a global climate leader, and there won't be any more money left afterwards. And the political will, especially with Michael Gove in power, is probably going the other direction. So this is our saloon. Can we do that within this paper? What's one of the barriers that we've also talked to this is the lack of awareness locally about what COP26 is. So the BBC did a study and found that less than 20% of those who were interviewed in the survey knew about the COP26 summit. And that's just crazy, especially it's on our soils, it's on our territory. This is us. So just today, you may have seen this on the BBC, but the BBC is going to do massive campaign around COP26 and huge coverage of COP26. So this becomes something that we can use across all news channels locally. And there is a road to COP26 where there are, we've had the World Car Free Day, there's been a Business Green Net Zero Festival, there's been the Tree Planting Week, there's been the Great Green, Big Green Week. These are all things that are happening on the road up to COP26 that we can all get involved in. And I'm in touch with Friends of the Earth. So Friends of the Earth were the ones who really mobilized a lot of the campaign groups in local communities to campaign to get their councils to declare a climate emergency. And over 90% of councils have declared a climate emergency. But most of them ended their declaration saying, and we ask the government to provide us with the powers and the resources to achieve this, because we don't have them. Now, what Friends of the Earth are doing now is to push councils. They're pushing campaign groups to push councils to say, you declared it, and now what are you doing? Have you got the actions? Show us the actions. Have you got an action plan? Has it got funding attached? And I agree with that campaign. I'm talking with Friends of the Earth, but I'm also asking Friends of the Earth to understand that councils can do so much, but they could do much, much more if they were given the regulatory powers to put their own standards for housing, to really act on the transport, and to have the funding that's needed for the active travel plans and for the funding that's needed for the EV strategies, to have those mandates and those powers and the funding again for this to happen, for the mass retrofitting of homes, council homes and social rental, have the funding to do this. So I've drafted this letter to the Prime Minister. It's been taken up by the Lib Dem LGA leadership, which is Joe Harris and Bridget Smith. This is now online as a sign up letter. It's a longer letter than this, and I can give you the link to this. And what we want to do now, working with Friends of the Earth, I've just had a conversation today with Friends of the Earth ahead of their campaigns, to see if we can mobilize again those campaign groups, to mobilize councils, to sign up to this letter that we can then give to the Prime Minister, which says, at COP26, make sure that in your net zero strategy, in your NDC, and you as president of COP26, Alok Sharma, include local councils in the announcement and in the agreement. So this is where I want to talk to you now as well about any questions you may have on the feedback that I'm giving you on what I've been doing in this role, what we're doing with this campaign, which we've got 32 days now to really push for, and how we can build on this, get mass sign up to this letter and to one that isn't just for councils, but is, I'm thinking, and I'd like to hear from you, but we've also got a petition that we get going out across the country. Now, Friends of the Earth Victoria Marsden said, we have got a strategy going towards COP26. It didn't include this, but actually this is very compelling. So I have another meeting with them on Monday with their head of local government and their COP26 strategy people to see if they would be part of that with us. I'm going to stop sharing and say hello to everybody. If you can put your video on, that would be lovely. Great. Hi, Lance. Lovely. So fire away, because any questions that you have on anything I've said, or any things that you think we should be doing in order to really make sure that we can take this campaign and make it work, then I'm really, really looking forward to hearing from you. So you can, now if you can see, you can raise your hand, if you can see where you can do that in terms of your controls. And that's usually down below where you can say, raise your hand, or if you go to the participants list and you hover over your name, you can raise your hand or put into the chat box that you would like to speak. And I've got a few already in chat. And David Appleton, that is just, I hope everybody saw that, but yes, that is one of the most impactful statements, isn't it, from Dave Goulson, who gave a talk to the Green Lib Dems in our special interest group on doubling nature. And this is a quote from him. David, do you want to read that one out?
Yeah, it's something that Dave Goulson said to me at a talk at Norwich Science Week a couple of years ago, and it was a throwaway line. I don't really know who Dave Goulson is. He's a professor at Sussex University. I don't know his full title, but basically he's a world expert on insects, particularly bees and bumblebees. And the talk was about bumblebees and the massive decline, loss of biodiversity, which is he's just published another book on. And it was a throwaway line at the end of a conversation I was having with him. He said, we would do anything for our children except leave them a planet they can live on. And I emailed him the following day and said, Dave, would you be happy if I was to plagiarize that and use it, you know, however I want? And he said yes. And I've thrown it out to the party and the Green Liberal Democrats a few times, and nobody's actually sort of taken it up and used it as a slogan. But everybody I've said it to has said how arresting it is as a slogan.
I'm going to include it in my stuff, and I think we'll get the Green Lib Dems to include it too, David. Absolutely, yeah, I think that's a good one. But we also then need the kind of the positive, you know, the positive side. But it does just that reflection, you know, it gives us that reflection. And what I see is you also asked about the letter, and others have asked about the letter. Rob Banks, hi Rob.
Hiya, hello.
Hello. So Rob's works with the LGA, works with the Lib Dems at the LGA, fantastic officer, huge experience there. So Rob, you've given the link to that letter, which is in the chat, yeah. So people can see that link to the letter. And so, yeah, immediately, you know, it's for leaders of councils, it's for CEOs, it's for the officers, it's for the councillors. And if you think, you know, that we could actually take this position wider, and that's what I'd like Friends of the Earth to talk to them about before we launch our own, but maybe we can go even wider than this. If you think that's a very, you know, it's a compelling message that gets through. Firas, are you there still? Hi. Yes. So you're asking about how you could get involved with the conference. I think you're on mute.
I'm asking about how we can actually go to the conference, if that's at all possible.
Yeah.
And if we can like set up maybe like a national system of allowing councillors who want to go to get involved. I know that it may not be in much time, but I, for one, really would like to go.
That's fantastic. Good.
Yeah.
So there's been an accreditation. So there's a blue zone, which is where the governments are and where they do the negotiation and where there are specific kind of events in there. There's a green zone, which is where it's civil society, basically, inviting government to come and see what they're doing, but also showcasing to everybody, that what they're doing. And then there are lots of things happening in different parts of Glasgow, all around, with different themes and events in different places. So for the green zone, you can attend the events that are in the green zone. And if you look up on the COP26, Rob, are you looking at me curiously? You're not able to do the green zone? Rob, did you just look querulously at that or not?
No.
Oh,
no.
good. Good.
Not just listening.
It's my teacher. I'm looking around the room to just check how everybody is. No, so so the green zone is amazing. Every day there's a whole series of events for us, and there will be there will be on the 11th of November now the dedicated cities, regions, local government and built environment day. So on the 11th of November, which is the last but one day of COP before the final negotiation agreement, will be the local government day. And so there'll be events both in the green zone and in the blue zone. But also internationally, all of the local governments around the world are coming together for a multi-level action kind of pavilion, where they're going to be running throughout the 2 weeks different events. So you can also look up the program for that and see, when you might want to attend those events. There's another way to be involved as well, which is there's a call for councils to provide great case studies that can be exhibited as part of the local government exhibition on local government day. So even if you personally can't get in the blue zone, you can get your council in there. And if you see, there'll be massive BBC coverage and whatever. So there'll be huge media coverage around what's being exhibited in all the stands. But I think that stand on that day will get a huge amount of coverage. And I'll be there in the blue zone because I've got accreditation to be in the blue zone. So, it would be really good on that day, the 11th, to really be honing in and doing live streaming to different councils that can't go, or whatever, and live streaming to people that can't be there. Others are doing local climate COPs. So actually, Friends of the Earth are helping arrange local COPs because many people actually don't really want to travel with COVID. That they're still concerned about that. So it's now talking about perhaps even more democratizing, making it more possible to be inclusive and participation by having local and regional COPs in the build up to COP and even after COP as well. So, have a look for those too. Great, Chris. But let me know if you're going and we'll meet up.
Yeah, I'll try.
David.
Pippa, have you got buy-in from Ed Davey to pressurise all Lib Dem councillors and indeed members to sign this letter and apply pressure to support your campaign?
That's a good idea, Rob. We kind of what do you think?
I'm sure Ed would be very supportive of anything like that. I can't see why not. We'll be putting out to all Lib Dem councillors. We've got an email list for Lib Dem councillors in England and Wales, and if there's any Scottish colleagues, we're happy to share the link. It's in the chat, but we'll be sending out a reminder tomorrow to all Lib Dem councillors across England and Wales. So do encourage colleagues or councillors, if you're not a councillor, to sign up.
And I think we could go even more, David. So perhaps what we do is when we're looking at sort of a mass campaign, so we want local campaign groups to be doing it. I think we want the MPs in each of the areas that we have the MPs to also be, getting the pressure on the councils, to sort of sign up as well and supporting those, because they can be lobbied by the climate groups as well, so the MPs do it on our side. And show that they're taking, so we could get our MPs already, being there in Parliament to receive the letter and things like that and to lobby for us. So I think we could do something with our MPs and with Ed Davey as well to help boost this whole campaign, not only spreading the message, but them acting as MPs and in their role to do it. Yeah, good idea.
Yeah, but I mean, surely, I mean, this is the biggest issue of our time. There is no bigger issue. Surely Ed has to step up here and send a, if you like, I don't know other word to use, a directive down to all local parties that they have to get onto this. You know, everything else pales into insignificance because everything else, you know, whether it's social care, NHS, transport, it will all be swept away by climate change. There's everything else that people focus on every day, whilst that it's important day to day, it will be swept away by climate change within a very short period of time. And it really is time that the party leadership, and I'm not criticising Ed because he's massively overworked, and as are all our MPs. But you know, this is the time that the party has to step up and tell if Lib Dems don't get it now, and you look at the very low numbers of members of the Green Liberal Democrats out of the total party membership, it frightens me, frankly. You know, the party has to step up and impress on local parties that they have to get on board with this issue.
Yeah, I agree, David. So
32 days. Yeah,
so he's been very, very vocal. They've got a campaign up to COP26, but what we need to do is get that focus on the local side as well. So I've got here somebody with just a phone number. It's Adam Tranter. Are you with us on the phone there? Is that Adam? Or is that a quote from Adam Tranter? Maybe not. I see still on there on the phone, but maybe not possible to do. Okay, but but that's about the sort of working together in terms of transport. Good. So Lance.
So I'm at Surrey County Council, which is a very Conservative-driven council, and we've got a motion going forward asking the council to go to Michael Gove, who's my MP as it happens, and the various people running COP to ask for funding, because the two big issues from our council's point of view, one is funding, and the council is using that, saying, yeah, we've got all these things we could do, but we don't have the funding. But in my mind, the bigger issue is the communications and engagement, because that's something the local councils could be doing now. And, you know, there are 1.2 million people in Surrey who are all in denial, really. We're all in denial. We just want it to get better and go away. And we all know it's not going to. And that's classic denial. And the challenge, I think, we all have is how do you communicate a positive message that, which particularly you did quite a great job on, which is, you know, there is lots of bad news and some of the predictions are awful. However, we can't just do nothing and deny it. We have to start engaging. And I'm really struggling to get the council and this LGA thing is, you know, I put that motion together myself. I'm not seeing anything coming out of the LGA to support councillors in what we should be putting into councils to get motions for, what we're asking for, to make a difference. And so
it's really, yeah, it's good, Lance, because what I mean, I think it's I'm just struck by how much I didn't know before going, you know, into this role within the LGA. And I'd always seen, the reason I wanted to go in because I knew that was a huge amount, but I didn't realize how much was in there. And I think so part of my role is kind of how do we get that out there more, and how do we get more kind of case studies coming in and examples that we can build on. But actually there is a page which is dedicated to what are the kinds of motions that you can put to scrutinize, if you're in opposition, to scrutinize the council on its climate action.
And that's there now.
Yes.
So I could go.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes. So that's one.
So
then there's another page which has kind of examples of motions that have kind of gone forward around different issues. But that is one which I think is a really useful one. It kind of gives you then, these are things that you can scrutinize. You know, really get in there. Are they doing this? Yeah.
Okay, I will go and look for that. Thank you very much.
Great.
I want to say something. I'm slightly scared, but I still want to say it because I feel very strongly about it.
Yeah.
I think the single person who's doing probably the most out of everybody in the world to fight climate change is probably Elon Musk. You know, with his Tesla car and Tesla energy, solar energy. I mean, I know that he's doing other things that probably are not helping that, but you know, he is saying that. I mean, you only need to say that the main mission of Tesla is to accelerate, you know, the move towards sustainable transport and sustainable world in general. And this is a little bit long, but not too long. So if it wasn't for Brexit, it could well be that his factory, which is now in Berlin, could have been somewhere in the UK. I know there are a lot of local councils asking him to try and build factories for Tesla in the UK, but I know he won't do it because you simply cannot export into Europe at the moment with the current legal system we have, especially cars. But there is one thing that we could potentially ask him to do as a collective, is that we have the massive problem with the trucks and truck drivers. And he's working towards autonomous trucks, you know, with his Tesla Semi, which is going to be electric. And we obviously need a lot of that relatively, you know, as soon as we can get them. So while he's not going to be building a factory for Tesla in the UK, could we try and ask, you know, as the UK with this big problem we have now, would you like to come and do your research on autonomous electric trucks in the UK to try and help us with both transfer from diesel and reducing the need for drivers?
So I think it'll be very interesting to, if you look up the decarbonisation strategy, Firas, which is available, and it does have a section on autonomous, you know, the role of autonomous transport and AI within that, and sort of projections of when that might come in and where are some of the barriers. So, you know, that would be interesting. And, you know, it sounds like you know, this is something to...
I'm quite happy to email or something, you know, to put something in writing and send it to the right person if that could be moved.
Yeah, I'm just thinking whether, you know, the transport group, so the policy board that I'm on does look at transport issues. The one that they've most looked at recently is, you know, they're looking to project what's happening with the drone strategy, you know, and how that will also...
With Amazon and Jeff Bezos and
Yeah, so there's kind of various elements that are coming in here, but can you, as a local authority, locally, what role you're saying can you do in all that? So that's good, Firas. Thank you. If you send that, would be interesting. The other, before I go on to Mark's question, the other thing that is different in this COP from all of the other COP global climate summits is that finally it will link nature and climate. So we have COP global nature summits, and the next one will be in China, and it's been postponed until early next year. But all of the UN agencies have agreed now that nature and climate change, that the ecological emergency and the climate emergency are inextricably linked. So for, you know, there will be a day for nature-based solutions to climate change in this COP. And that is, yeah, finally we can sort of bring them into the same room, because what we saw in the UK climate risk assessment was that one of the biggest risks in the UK from climate change is biodiversity, and that's just the UK, never mind sort of globally. So it's also about how we use and ensure that nature is functioning and the ecosystem services are functioning to be able to effectively adapt and address and prevent some of the greater impacts from that. So that's a key piece where we're bringing together nature and climate change. I see, Mark, you had a question.
Yes, it struck a chord with me about when you said about only 20% or whatever the survey was were aware of COP26. It doesn't completely surprise me, but it did make me wonder, you know, particularly with the BBC's activity, to what extent councils could get local media on their side, and local media are interested in things that are being done locally to tackle climate change and thus increase awareness through the local population or readership or listenership or whatever.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I'm wondering whether with the BBC whether they are looking at doing this out through all of their local channels as well, through the local BBC branches. But I think that's true. I think we should be feeding them what they need, because they're going to need a lot of material. So if we can start feeding them that material, then and challenging them to hold sessions on it, I think that would be good. But Nicole, you've sort of said one of the ways perhaps to get people to prick up their ears is around small businesses, SMEs.
Yeah, no, so I haven't got a very good voice actually, Pippa, but yeah, I just think that as the bigger companies are all got their zero carbon goals and stuff, they're going to be looking at their supply chains. And if you don't align, then they're going to be going elsewhere. So I just think that the chap in Surrey talked about, making people prick up their ears. I think if you are working for an SME and you're not thinking about those things, it's actually going to have big business consequences for you in the future quite soon, probably quicker than legislation will.
Now that's an interesting thing, because I think, for example, at South Cambs District Council, we set up sort of a business group initially. We're trying to work out how we supported businesses locally. Then COVID happened, and with the government grants that came to businesses, it's just created now this relationship with especially with small businesses that we've never had before. And we're now looking at how do you continue, and the way we're looking at it is, so how do we work with you to look at post-COVID recovery? And I think, Nicole, I don't think this is part of it. So I think that it's about that risk, isn't it? So having an understanding of that risk to your supply chain. We're looking at other risks to your supply chain right now, with both labor and with the shortages. But I think this is a really interesting one. I'd love that. Maybe we need to do a session on this one. I think that would be great. And we could take this to the, I think that's huge, isn't it? Do you want to say anything? Do you want to give us any advice? Are you doing anything at the moment with businesses on this?
Well, I work for Cambridge Carbon Footprint, which is a tiny local charity, but we've been doing something called From Ambition to Action. So it's recognizing that there's a lot of ambition, but people don't know how to go about starting. So we've just run 3 workshops that have mainly attracted SMEs, all about how to measure your footprint, how to communicate with your staff, and how to measure. They've been fairly popular, still a lot more work to do, but there is a lot of interest, but still not many designated people in the smaller organizations. The bigger organizations are just getting on with it. They've got their own teams, they've got their assigned people, but willingness, but not enough resource and not enough knowledge about the first most significant steps that you can take, and also where the low-hanging fruit is. So massive educational job there, I think.
That's brilliant. That's huge. So I think I'm going to go away and find out a bit more, and we can sort of bring this back into another session. I think that's really important. Good. We're at 8:30, everybody. And if you haven't already given me your email, if you want to hear more from me in between these sessions, then please just put your email into the chat, and I can get things to you. I'm also updating. I'm going to give you a link as well. Great, thanks, Lance. So I've also just put in there, that's my webpage. I'll also be putting in some updates in there of the meeting, so as we have them in between these Zoom meetings. The next Zoom meeting, well, I'm thinking how we're doing it, but what I want to do is to do it live from COP. So, we can sort of do some reporting from what's there, what's happening on the ground. So I can let you know what's happening on the kind of the big issues in terms of the negotiations, what's happening in terms of this ask that we have, and just give you a sense of, if you're not there, well, like Firas might even join me. We can do it together from there. But yes, so do put those in there. And I think that's where we end this evening, everybody. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Thank
Pepe.
you. Bye.